Get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Preacher man, don't tell me heaven is under the earth. I know you don't know what life is really worth. It's not all that glitter is gold. Half the story had never been told. And now you see the light. You stand up for your right. Get up, stand up for your right. You get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Most people think great God will come from the sky, take away everything, make everybody feel high. But if you know what life is worth, you will look for yours and ours. And now you see the light. You stand up for your right. So get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. You get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. We're sick and tired of the hissing schism, up and go to heaven in the hissing schism. We know and we understand Almighty God is a living man, and you can fool some people sometime, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And now you see the light, what you gonna do? Stand up for your right. Did you hear? Get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. You get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. 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 Why? 'Cause I never give up the fight. 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 Don't give up the fight. Don't give up the fight. Don't give up the fight. Just your children, don't give up the fight. 'Cause I never give up. 'Cause I never give up. 'Cause I never give up. 'Cause I never give up the fight. We're sick and tired of dying to go to heaven in. We know and we understand Almighty God is a living man, and you can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Now you see the light. Stand up for your right. Why don't give up the fight. 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 'Cause I never 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 give up the fight. So children, don't give up the fight. 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 Say it again. Most people think red God will come from the sky, away everything, make everybody feel like. But if you know what life is worth, you would look for yours on earth. Now you save the light, stand up for your right. Yeah. Get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. 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 Cause, cause,
And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101, the anthem of the struggle. Get up, stand up for your rights. Don't give up the fight. This week has been a week where our people have been on the move. They've been on the streets, in particular the teachers, standing up for their rights, standing up for their right to make decisions, standing up for their right to be citizens, stand up for their right to be treated with dignity, stand up for their rights to be treated with respect. The teachers are on the move. Tonight we are going to talk about what's happening with the teachers, what's happening with the education sector. We are in the midst of a pandemic. Everyone knows that. The pandemic has been around for more than a year. Everyone knows that. As the days and the weeks and the months roll by, we are faced with new challenges. And in times of crisis, it's when our governments are being challenged, our people are being challenged, our political leaders are being challenged. Time waits on no one. History moves on. And sometimes things happen that we did not plan for. That is what makes politics and society such a challenge, because it is difficult to predict what will happen as the days go by. And here we are in the face of a pandemic. People are dying. Millions of people have died all over the world. In our country and our region, Guyana and the Caribbean, we are faced with the same challenges. People are dying. People are dying. Make no mistake about that. But as often happens whenever there is a challenge, we are then faced with other challenges. If we think about the COVID-19 as a sickness, as an illness, and then we think about Guyana as a sick society, politically I'm speaking about. We're politically sick. We've always been a politically sick society in the sense that our country has suffered from the accidents of history. People did not ask for slavery to happen. African people came here under particular circumstances. The Amerindians were here before. When emancipation came in 1838, our East Indian and Portuguese and Chinese brothers and sisters came. And the circumstances in which we came meant that our society evolved in a certain way. Our society evolved in suspicion, where our groups have been suspicious of each other. Sometimes we have come together in the face of common conflict, but most of the time, we have looked across the fence at each other. History has dealt us a bad hand. And the challenge has always been, how do we exist? How do we coexist in Guyana? Our politicians have not done such a good job at bringing us together. We have a divided society and we have a system of winner takes all. So when one side of the political divide wins, it wins and takes all, and the other side loses and loses everything. That's the reality of our country. Sometimes we pretend that it's not there. Sometimes we hope. Sometimes we despair. But the reality is that our divisions are there. And so the challenge always is how to, in the face of those divisions, how do we survive in Guyana? The division is there. When elections come, the elections feed off that division. When wealth comes, the wealth feeds off that division. We cannot see these developments in isolation from the division. When the pandemic comes, the pandemic comes in the context of that division and feeds off that division. We have seen it so many times, yet we never prepare for it. We never prepare for it. Good night. Good night to everybody. Welcome to the program. Vibert, Tommy, Yvonne, Angel, Deborah, Karen, Cecile, those are the ones I'm seeing in front of me. Welcome to the program. Without you, there is no program. All those others who are joining us, welcome, welcome. We are on this journey together trying to correct wrongs, trying to give ourselves some strength. I was saying the division is there. And because we pretend that it's not there, And then a crisis comes, and the crisis is exacerbated by the divide. Now, here we are in the face of a pandemic in which people are asked to make adjustments. People are asked to make critical decisions. People are asked to be vaccinated. People are asked to wear masks. People are asked to do things that they would not normally do. And whenever human beings are asked to do things that they would not normally do, they ask questions. They ask questions. That is to be expected. I don't expect people to walk and line up and says, here is a pandemic, let's go take the vaccine, let's put on a mask I don't expect that. I expect that people will take different and different positions. That is the nature of human beings. And so the government, which was created to mediate our differences, that's why government was created. Human beings, by our very nature, we have differences. And when human beings came up with the concept of government, they created this mechanism called the government to mediate our differences, not to exacerbate our differences. The governments are there to mediate our differences. One philosopher said that mankind left to our own devices, our lives would be short, nasty, and brutish. Hobbes, John Hobbes, he said, if we are left to our devices, our individual devices, our life would be short, nasty, and brutish. Meaning that if each individual is allowed to make his or our own decision, we will have confusion, anarchy. And so therefore we created this mechanism, this institution called government, to mediate the differences among people. And that is why government is critical. In a sense, each individual gives to the government some power to help to mediate our differences. That's the word today. The function of government is to mediate differences in society. What we have seen as human society has evolved is that governments generally tend to exacerbate our differences because we have created the mechanism by which we government on a partisan basis. We say, let's form parties and let these parties compete. And then at the end of the day, one of them is a winner. And that winner will govern on behalf of everyone. But that is not how governments have evolved. Parties compete and one wins, and that one that wins governs on behalf of those who voted for it. That is the reality of how governments have evolved. The challenge for that government of one side that wins is how does it reward those who voted for it while giving those who did not vote for it, protecting their rights. How does the government protect the rights of those who voted for it and also protect the rights of those who did not vote for it? That is the challenge of government. If you have sides who see each other as enemies, and then you compete, and one side wins, the one sees the losers as their enemies. In Guyana, African Guyanese and East Indian Guyanese are not historical enemies, meaning that Indian Guyanese have never enslaved African Guyanese and African Guyanese have never enslaved Indian Guyanese. We are not historical enemies. Europeans and Africans are historical enemies because Europeans enslaved Africans. They're historical enemies. But Africans and East Indians are not historical enemies. Africans and Amerindians are not historical enemies. Africans and Chinese and Portuguese are not historical enemies. Although Portugal is part of Europe, Europeans have never considered Portuguese as full Europeans. So we are not historical enemies in Guyana. However, because of the competition for power, we have evolved. And over time, we began to act as historical enemies. Because at the time of independence, we did not evolve a system of governance that ensured that we live in unity. We evolved a system of governance that exacerbated whatever differences were there. And so we, over time, began to act as historical enemies. So when we win, we treat with those who voted for us as friends, and those who didn't vote for us as enemies. That is the reality of Guyana. We therefore depend on leaders to contain the situation when they win, to balance satisfying their supporters while governing in a way that includes those who did not win. We therefore need leaders with character, leaders with knowledge, leaders with courage, leaders with foresight, leaders with vision, leaders who are prepared to cross the boundaries, leaders who are prepared to go to the mountaintop and look over and see all of us as people, one people. Unfortunately, we have not produced such leaders. It is not that we don't have it within us to produce such leaders, but leaders are products of their environment. And we rely on them, who are products of their environment, to try to transcend the debilitating aspects of that society. Our greatest challenge in Guyana is our ethnic division. No matter we twist it and turn it, one people, one nation, one destiny, that's an aspiration. It's not a reality. It's an aspiration. That's what we aspire to. But we treat it sometimes as a reality and handcuff, blind ourselves to the reality that we are not one people, one nation. We are several peoples aspiring to be one nation. So, when we are hit with a situation that requires us to come together as a nation, to hold hands and hold heads together as a nation, we are found wanting. COVID-19 requires a nation that is united. Even if for a moment, COVID-19 in the context of division is disaster. COVID-19 in the context of unity gives all of us a chance. Let's be frank. We have COVID-19 in the context of division. And that's what the problem is. Look, you're faced with a pandemic. There are different viewpoints about how to deal with this pandemic. There's one view that says the more we vaccinate, the more we control the pandemic. That's a legitimate view. There are views that are skeptical of vaccines. So what are the alternatives? Let's wear masks. Let's observe proper sanitation, wash our hands. Let's social distance. Let's avoid crowds. That's another way of controlling the pandemic. There are two options, or two major options. Take the vaccine, wear the mask, social distance, avoid crowds. Those are all things that are put on the table. Some of us would resist the vaccines. There is science in favor of vaccines and there is science against vaccines. And people in the age of technology are coming into contact with all of that science. In the old days when we would take vaccines easily, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have all this technology where people are hearing the different views. So it was easy for people to be vaccinated. But there are strong views against vaccination and for vaccination. For the record, I am vaccinated. I took both since in January, February, or whenever it was. Except for the first day, when I slept right through the day, I've had no side effects. So I think the vaccine has worked for me. I would I would like to encourage people, if you feel satisfied, to take the vaccine. I think it saves life. If you don't take the vaccine, if you don't feel comfortable taking the vaccine because of underlying medical issues or because you're skeptical about the vaccine, then observe the alternatives. Wear a mask, social distance, stay away from crowds. The pandemic is real. So many of us know somebody. So many of us have family members who've died. Some of them survived. Some died. I've heard some people say, COVID is not real. No, I don't buy that. COVID is real. If you don't feel comfortable with the vaccination, observe something else. All of us have a responsibility because this is a contagious disease. I understand people stressing individualism, my body, my choice. There is some truth to my body, my choice. But there is a point where your choice stops and the safety of the larger society begins. That's the truth. I can choose to drink every day and get drunk. But if every day I drink and get drunk and go home and beat my wife, then my choice to get drunk is problematic. At some point, my choice to drink and get drunk every day stops. And my wife's right or choice not to be beaten begins. Yes. I understand why people are saying my body, my choice. I understand. I don't have a problem with it, people saying it, but I'm saying I think there's a responsibility of people like myself to lay it out. There is some point your choice about your body stops. And other people's choices begin. We gotta be sober about this. Where does the government come in? Where does the government come in? Where does the government come in? The government, as I said before, has to mediate between those who privilege or those who think their individual choice is absolute, and those who believe the collective responsibility is absolute. Individual choice can never be absolute when you live among other people. You are not an island. Your individual choice is not absolute. By the same token, the government's power to take away your individual choice to benefit the collective is not absolute. There's nothing like absolute individual choice, and there's nothing like absolute government power. But the government Because it is the government of all the people, because it has power, institutional power, the government has the bigger responsibility to mediate. If there is conflict in society, the government must mediate. The government must not exacerbate that conflict. And if the government by itself cannot mediate, then call in the other stakeholders. Come in, I come, oh, come, Risedale. Your people have some problems with this vaccine. And we as a government that they don't vote for and they don't like us and they don't believe we should be telling them to do anything. We can't do this thing on our own, and they're citizens. We can't do it on our own. So listen, come in, let's sit down. As you are their representatives, we are representing our people. Let's sit down in this crisis and let's work this thing out. Perhaps if those people hear you, Mr. Harmer, hear you, Amansa Desir, hear you, Roysdale Ford, perhaps if they hear you say that my body, my choice is not an absolute thing, perhaps that would temper them a little. Because they trust you. They voted for you. If I, Bara Jagdio, and Orphan Ali tell them, your body, your choice is not absolute, they're going to run me out of town because they don't trust me. So in a situation where half the society doesn't trust the government has no currency. It has no scope to tell those people anything. Is diminished. Because those people do not believe the government is legitimate. And the government has to recognize that and said, look, come in. During the Second World War, when Britain was being bombarded by Hitler, what did Mr. Churchill, the conservative prime minister, did? He called in the leader of the Labour Party and he said, let's form a war government, our sharing government. I am the Prime Minister, Mr. Attlee. You are the Deputy Prime Minister. We will have cabinet members from both sides, and that would be a war government. Because this war effort cannot be a conservative effort. It has to be all of us. And they set up a war government. And when the war was over, they go back to competing against each other. We are at war. We are at war against a pandemic. And we are at war against ourselves based on what happened last year. Olos panolos. We are at war against a pandemic. And we are at war, a political war among ourselves because of what happened last year. When some of us told them last year, form a power sharing government. They said, no. We win. You win the war. But now we have a battle against a pandemic and you can't win the battle. You damn fools. Well, for government. In a country like Guyana, you can win a war. But that doesn't mean you win the battle. Because when you are faced with a crisis, you can't do anything about it. And you are so unselfish that you can't realize the society is dying. The society is bleeding. Let me call in my adversaries and let us sit down and solve this together. The people there on the road, the teachers, the nurses. And you feel that if you lock them out, that will solve the problem. But if you lock them out, you get what you have in. And we are risking hurting our society further when we are divided like that. Listen, I am pro-vaccine, but I will defend with my last breath the right of those who do not believe in the vaccine or are hesitant about it, the right to say, I shall not be bullied. I don't think we're ready for mandates yet. I think the situation is bad. But I don't think we're ready for mandates. I think the situation can be brought under control right now. And I think the effort should be to control it. And where there are differences, to mediate. To mediate. So long as this government of Guyana feels that it can bully people to solve this conflict, because it's a conflict, to solve this problem, what it will do is exacerbate the problem. When you lock people out, you get them vexed. And when you get them vexed, they remember everything bad that you did do for them. People are vexed with you because you're telling them they must take the vaccine. And when they start to get vexed with you for the vaccine, they're going to get vexed with you for racism. They're going to get vexed with you for your unfair ways in which you are distributing resources. They're going to get vexed with you for what happened last year in the election. So remember all the vexing. When you're cussing, when a woman cussing her husband, pre-drunkenness, she will remember every other bad thing that you do and cuss about it. And that's what's happening to this government. And this government does not have the humanity. It doesn't have the vision. It doesn't have the desire to save our society. So it's by force. Harman has given the branch. Rapport has given the olive branch. People who they may call on the fringes like myself have called for us to let's together with the government, let us solve this thing. We have given the olive branch. What that asinine response that Mr. Harman must recognize your government before you can sit down with E to talk about vaccine and COVID-19, to say you are prepared to sacrifice the safety of our society, the safety of our country, the safety of our people. You are prepared to sacrifice that for some stupid, nonsense, ignorant position. That Harman must recognize you. Who are you? Who the hell are you? But that is paramount to the safety of our society. Where does that leave us on the opposition side? Where does that leave us? Where does that leave the teachers' union? Where does that leave the Nurses Association? Where does that leave the Public Service Union? Where does that leave the opposition parties? Where does that leave opposition leaders? When you are playing games with the health of our people, every day is another COVID death. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. For a small society, that's plenty. And we are begging you to come to the table, to sit down, let's do this thing together. And you are saying, Harman must recognize you. I don't get into people politics, meaning calling people name and cussing up Jack Dio and cussing out Orphan. That's not my politics. My opposition is not to individuals, my opposition is to systems and power. That insofar as they're opposition, insofar as they're human beings who hold power and they're behaving like jackasses, then one has to call them out. Anyhow, we're going to have Coretta McDonald on to talk about what the teachers are doing, what is happening there on the road, because we don't want them to frame what is happening for us. We have to frame our own narratives. So Coretta is coming on to do that. We're going to talk about why the GTU called their teachers out, what are their demands, what's been happening on the streets, and then we're going to have two teachers, Vanessa Kissoon and Dion Abrams, who are going to weigh in. So I'm going to take a short break. Get up, stand up for your rights. The anthem, I want that anthem to sink in tonight. So I'm not going to play anything else in the break. I'm going to play Bob Marley, Get Up, Stand Up for Your Rights. We're going to do 2 minutes of that, and then we'll come back to Coretta McDonald and the other two guests, Vanessa and Dion Abrams. Short break, and we come back on the other side. Get up, stand up for your rights.
Stand up for your rights. Lift up and get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Lift up and get up, stand up. Oh, stand up for your rights. Get up, get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. I say, preacher man, don't tell me that your heaven is on the earth. Yeah. I know you don't know what life is really worth. It's not all the glitter is gold. Half the story had never been told. And now you see the light. What you gonna do? Stand up for your right. Did you hear? Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. You see, most people think great God will come from the sky. Take away everything, make everybody feel high. But if you know what life is worth, you would look for yours and earth. And now you see the light. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Listen, get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Did you hear? Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Listen, get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Hey, we're sick and tired of the distance.
Get up, stand up for your rights. The poetic voice of our Caribbean calling our people to action. And our people are taking action in their own name, in the name of righteousness, in the name of justice, led by their trade union. The union is the oldest social organization in our Caribbean. Our first trade union in Guyana was formed 1919, the Guyana Labor Union. And my study of history tells me that the trade unionists attended a conference. Trade unionists attended a conference in Europe. Critchlow and Marichaud and all the others, and they came back to the Caribbean. They began to talk about a Caribbean independence. Can we clear the screen, please? A Caribbean independence. In 1930s, it was the trade unions, starting in 1932 in Jamaica, coming right through the Caribbean, what they call the 1930s riots. In those days, they call everything that the poor people do as riots. It was the trade unions. From Jamaica in the north, right through to Guyana in the south, the workers rising up and saying, we have had enough of colonial rule. And that began the final march to independence, the trade union, not the political party. The trade union is the backbone of our struggle. There was always the political arm of the trade unions. It is those political arms that became the political parties. But as the unionists would say, it's a union that makes us strong. To our peril, we have downplayed the role of the union. Sometimes we, the workers ourselves, don't understand the power of the union. Replace the unions with political parties. That's part of our trouble. The root is the trade unions. The General Secretary of the Guyana Teachers Union, Bertha McDonald. Welcome, Bertha.
Hi, good night to you, Dr. Hines, and good night to your viewing audience. Thanks for having me here again. I know it has been very trying trying to get me here, but I'm here nevertheless.
Yes, you're hardworking. You're on the road. You have to meet. You have to plan strategies. You have to do everything. So I know, and that's why I've been patient. But I think you need to come on here and to talk to our people to tell us your story. We don't want newsroom and all those things. Tell our stories. We need to hear from you. So, Coretta, why have you all called the teachers out in the road?
Dr. Hines, this is not only about the vaccination process and the forced vaccines and the restrictions that have been laid out in the gazetted order. Our history, or our story, let me say, goes way back to 2019. And so our teachers have not received increases in salaries since 2019. Our teachers who have graduated from university and the Cyril Potter College, their statuses have not been upgraded. So you understand they are losing finances all the time. Everything, the allowances for our teachers have not been honored. The risk allowances, every single thing when it comes to finances or non-financial matters, those have not been honored since 2019. When Priya Manikchand came to office in August of 2020, we met with her. We had 2 face-to-face meetings. You're hearing me? In COVID, we had 2 face-to-face meetings because the union thought that this was necessary to meet with the new minister, well, all new minister, and her team to say to her exactly where we are at with regards to the agreement that has been signed with the government of Guyana, not the coalition, with the government of Guyana. We listed all the issues there that have not been honored. The minister, we had at that point, we were able to provide them. Of course, this work was done between the GTU and the ministry, but we were still able to provide the minister with the information with regards to how many teachers are owing here, how many teachers are owing there, what is the increase in salary we're looking at. And she promised then that she was going to engage her colleague at the Ministry of Finance to ensure that these obligations were honored. From last August to now, it's a year. Nothing has happened in that regard. We have questioned it on several occasions. We have resent documents on several occasions. And every time we have we started moving away from the face-to-face meetings, because I think that the Minister of Education, if you know her well, you would know that she's a bully. And so when she doesn't want to answer your questions, we have all sorts of excuses. And so we moved from having the face-to-face meetings to having meetings on Zoom. Every time we raise the issues about our outstanding financial and other issues with regards to the signing of the agreement or the agreement that we have in place, all you would hear from them is, it is still at finance. It is still at finance. We learned 3 months ago, I think it was, or 2 months ago, that our issues are now engaging the Attorney General. I don't know since when a signed agreement has to engage the attention of the Attorney General. The PPP were in government for 23 years. We have never heard them saying our agreement for them to make payments and so on, it has to be looked at by the Attorney General, and he has got to pronounce on it. So that's the kind of stalemate business that we're having. As a matter of fact, we see this as a direct means of prolonging our issues. We raised with the minister on several occasions that we cannot continue to tell our teachers that you are waiting on finance, that you are not a paying agency, you have to get from finance. We are tired of telling our teachers that, and we will no longer say that to our teachers. When we saw the issue of the GAISUCO workers going out on strike, and they were given $200 million, we raised the issue again and we said, well, if GAISUCO could get monies, we could get monies. Why aren't you making representation for the teachers? The same issue. I don't pay. I am not the Minister of Finance. I have to wait for them to give me directions. Well, the direction's not coming from finance. And we see this as a deliberate act and a deliberate ploy to punish teachers. You know why? Because they've recognized that many of our teachers are not their supporters. So this is their way of punishing our teachers, which is totally wrong. As the government of the day, whether teachers vote for you or not, it is your obligation to honor what was signed. And I had to be remarking very often in our meetings, because the minister would tell you things like, well, these are things that I came here and I inherited. And I had to tell her, stop the trash. When the coalition took over from the PPP after 23 years, they inherited from 2006 a housing revolving program that you could never have gotten off. They started putting systems in place to have that program being run off so the teachers can have access to the funding in that revolving program. So don't tell me about what you inherited. Everybody, as long as you're a government and the government changes, then somebody inherits from somebody. But this is how minute these people's minds are. And all they look to do is to throw the blame on somebody else rather than saying, look, we are the government of the day. We're going to work with you, GTU. It's 2019, 2020, and we have 2021. Mind you, let me say, the teachers have gotten accustomed to receiving their increases in salary from the first month of the year. So while everybody else wait for the end of the year, we receive our salary increases in January of the new year. So when the teachers kept looking forward to their clothing allowance, their salary increases, allowances for additional qualifications and so on, and you don't see those coming, then teachers begin to question it. But I was saying that the union was prepared to hear from the ministry, to hear them saying, look, it's 3 years. These are the amount of monies that are owing. We can't pay you all at one time. And that's why we have discussions. That's why we negotiate. And the union, as caring as it is, we would have been able to say to the Minister of Education and her team, look, let's complete 2019 and see how far in 2020 or 2020, if they had started since in 2020, we would have been halfway through this whole thing. But they have decided not to do anything. Further to that, we saw Gaisuko going out there again. They got more monies. We saw because GAU, the Gaisuko workers falls under GAU. We saw the GPL workers going out there on Main Street. They got monies. But teachers who got their business since 2019 lingering, no monies are made available to teachers. Now, if you look at the trend, you're going to see GAU and NASI, they form part of FITUG. And that organization is closely linked to the PPP.
Yeah. Yeah.
The GTU, as they've always been saying, is an arm of the PNC, and they're pronouncing it more now, but I'm going to come to that a little later. And so they are stifling our teachers, forgetting that our teachers in generally, teaching is that noble profession, and those are the people who create all other professions. We are the ones who can make a child into what he or she has never ever dreamed about being. But they want to take teachers for granted. Now, in 2018, the GTU took massive industrial action against the coalition government. During that time, the PPP were in high support of that strike. The PPP were championing our cause on their Facebook pages and all over. As a matter of fact, Bharat Jagdeo was there on his Facebook page, and he held a press conference. And this is what Bharat Jagdeo said: this strike is not a political one, although they are trying to say so. This is not a political strike. The demands of the teachers are legitimate. If the government cannot meet all the demands, they need to engage the teachers union and they need to engage the teachers union. They need to engage. The teachers have been crying out for engagement. The parents should now come out and join the teachers. Now, this was Bharat Jagdeo, saying that the strike is not political, but the same Bharat Jagdeo in 2021 is saying that the GTU is a political arm, and we are motivated by the opposition leader and all the others. Priya Manik Chand, several posts she had on Facebook, a particular post she had there with the teachers from the Essequibo Coast, where she stated 600 plus teachers have heeded the calls of their union, and they're out in support, they're on strike. And is the minister still saying that the teachers are not listening to their union? This is not political, Priya Manik Chand. But in 2021, the whole focus has now shifted. So it's not now a protest action, because we're on protest action. This action now is not an action that sees teachers crying out for engagement and teachers wanting their obligations to be honored. It's the case now where we're seeing that the teachers union is being used as a political tool, and more, not so much the teachers union and the other executive office, but Coretta MacDonald. Because if you've been noticing the trend, every time Priya Manik Chand has a press conference, 3/4 of it is based on Coretta MacDonald. If she issues a press statement, Coretta MacDonald must be featured in it. Whatever they do, it's about Coretta MacDonald. I saw them just recently attacking my qualification. I saw them just this afternoon putting up fake posts. They're talking about me, telling other persons, let's attack teachers who don't want to support this strike. But you know, I want to say to folks, and those of people across this country have come to recognize, and elsewhere further afield, that Coretta MacDonald is a principled person. When the party that I supported failed to recognize and honor and respect teachers, I stood up against them. And there is no way that I would not stand up against any other administration who decide that they don't want to respect teachers and to honor our obligations. I must say that Coretta MacDonald is a teacher. Coretta MacDonald is a teacher. So whatever happens with teachers, that's what Coretta MacDonald gets. And I say this all the time to say this. Whereas other unions, their officers are full-time and they're being paid by their unions, at the Guyana Teachers Union, it's totally different. We don't receive salaries from our union. And I can say this here, at the GTU, the highest paid officer of the union, who is the president, he receives a stipend of $30,000, and that's the president. So I don't want people to think that, oh, the officers of the union, they're living big fancy lives and they're getting big fancy salaries, because you know, that is what the PPP have been throwing out there, that the GTU officers living big fancy life off of teachers, the dues that teachers are paying. That's not so. We are being paid by the Ministry of Education, the salaries according to our statuses. So the president, most of our officers, they are either head teachers or deputy head teachers or senior assistant masters or mistresses or heads of departments. And those are the salaries that they receive. But they receive an honorarium from the GTU, the highest being $30,000 that the president gets. So I just wanted to clear that. But this whole thing here, outside of the salaries agenda, up came COVID, and we now have all of these restrictions. Now, teachers, Dr. Hines, it pains to know that teachers who would have given 33 years, 29 years, 27 years of service to this country are now head teachers and deputies and senior masters and at all levels. They are now, in some instances, our teachers were escorted out of the schools by police ranks. Can you imagine that? Police ranks are escorting teachers from their places of work because they don't have a blue book, or because they don't have a PCR testing, a letter that says, I am negative. They are escorted from their schools. And this government is still talking about because they care. You know, the hypocrisy in this whole thing is, and that is what causes the pain. And this is what has caused the venom to be awoken in teachers. Because these very teachers who are being locked out now, because they're unvaccinated, were some of the very teachers who the Ministry of Education used to distribute their $19,000 cash grant. These very unvaxxed teachers, in many, many instances, were the teachers who were used to teach our grade 6 pupils, preparing them for exams. These very teachers marked the papers too. These very unvaxxed teachers were there with their other colleagues who are vaccinated, and they prepared our students for CSEC and the CAPE. These very teachers, before the vaccines, were out in the communities distributing worksheets to children, collecting worksheets and marking them. These very unvaxxed teachers ventured out to schools when we closed the schools, and they were in schools conducting classes with their charges. But now you're telling them that they can't enter the school compounds. They can't go into the buildings. Just as recent as last week, these very unvaxxed teachers were in school preparing for reopening of schools. These very unvaxxed teachers are still there. Well, they've stopped now, but they were still there organizing for those vaccination drives that they have in school, and now you're telling them that they're not worthy, they're not eligible to go into schools. You're telling them that now. You're ice pass teachers. Your ice pass teachers. You see, if you had said that to our teachers before, then we knew how to act. But you used us, and now you want to refuse us. We're not taking any of that. And so all of this is what would have led to teachers being on the streets, because as a union, let me say, on the 22nd and before the 22nd of August, the GTU said to the ministry, hey, we're hearing plans about reopening school for face-to-face learning. We are not sure that we are ready for face-to-face learning. But let me tell you this, the GTU will not stand in the way of schools reopening for face-to-face. But this is what we want to have happen. We want to join with you again to go out to school, to every school across this country, because we have 42 branches across this country, and so we have our reps all over. We said to them, let's put a timetable together. So we had that timetable worked out, and the last meeting we had was on the 22nd of August. You hearing me? The 22nd of August, we had that meeting a Sunday night. It went way into Sunday night, where we finalized the plan of the activity, the fact-finding activity that we were going out there to do. We had a checklist of 30 items. And so in every region, we had clusters of schools, and the GTU representative along with the Ministry of Education representative, and in some instances we had a parent or so from a PTA. We were visiting every school to ensure that everything is in place. We had adequate, not there at all, and we had the remarks column. That activity started on Monday the 23rd. Everything going good. We set out for a 2 weeks exercise because we said we don't know yet then. No definite word was given to us with a date for the reopening of schools. We just heard things being touted. The minister herself even said, well, you know, a date was just touted, but nothing is final. That was what we had in our minds all the time. There was nothing